One story, The Whispering Pines. I never imagined that a small village like Pinebrook could hide such dark secrets. I moved here for the peace and quiet, but that serenity was shattered the day I met my new neighbors, the Hargroves. It all started with a chance encounter. I was walking my dog, Max, through the narrow, winding streets of Pinebrook when I saw them for the first time. The Hargrove house sat at the end of a secluded lane, its old wooden exterior draped in creeping ivy. The couple, Edgar and Margaret, were always out in their garden, tending to overgrown roses and whispering to each other in hushed tones. Curiosity got the better of me, so I introduced myself one afternoon. Edgar was a tall man with a grizzled beard, and Margaret had a gaze that seemed to look right through you. Their welcome was polite but distant. They invited me for tea, which I politely declined, feeling an odd chill as I walked away. Over the weeks, I noticed strange things about the Hargroves. Their garden, though beautiful, was strangely silent. I never heard birds or insects. Even the wind seemed to avoid it. Every now and then, I'd catch Edgar or Margaret staring at me from their window, their expressions unreadable. One night, a heavy storm rolled through Pinebrook. Thunder rumbled and lightning flashed, casting eerie shadows across the village. I was snug inside my house, reading a book, when a loud knock echoed through my front door. It was Edgar, drenched from the rain. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his voice shaky. "Margaret, she's missing." I offered to help, but Edgar insisted it was a matter for the police. He left, saying he'd be back with an update. I couldn't sleep that night, the storm and the thought of Margaret's disappearance weighing heavily on me. The next morning, the storm had passed, but something was different. The village seemed emptier, quieter. I saw the Hargrove house in the distance, the front door wide open. I felt an uneasy compulsion to check on them. As I approached, I saw Edgar in the garden, digging frantically. I called out, but he didn't respond. The garden had an odd smell, like rotting wood. When I reached the garden, I noticed something peculiar. A set of footprints leading to a large, freshly dug hole. Edgar looked up, his face pale and strained. "Margaret, she used to whisper to the flowers," he said quietly. She believed they could hear her. He stepped aside, and I looked into the hole. At the bottom was an old, weather-beaten chest. Edgar opened it, revealing a collection of bizarre items. Old dolls with missing eyes, faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, and a journal filled with frantic, incoherent scribbles. "This is what she was trying to protect," Edgar said. "The village, it's not what it seems. They come here, whispering in the dark. Margaret wanted to keep them away." A chill ran down my spine. The whispers I'd heard in the night, the strange feeling in the garden, it all made sense now. The village wasn't just quiet. It was silenced by something sinister. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. Edgar looked at me with a mixture of desperation and fear. "They're coming for you next," he warned. "You've seen too much." I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I ran back to my house, the sense of dread hanging over me. As I packed my things and prepared to leave Pinebrook, I glanced out the window. The village was shrouded in an unnatural fog, and I could see figures moving silently among the trees. I never learned what exactly was lurking in Pinebrook, but I knew one thing for sure. Some places are best left unexplored. And some neighbors, no matter how friendly they seem, can harbor the darkest secrets of all. Two-story, The Neighbors Next Door. My name is Ethan Miller, and I've always considered myself a rational person. That changed the day I moved into my new apartment in downtown Chicago, and my life became entwined with the enigmatic neighbors next door. I'd just moved into the top floor of an old building on Elm Street, one of those charming but slightly worn-down places that still had character. The apartment was spacious, and the rent was surprisingly low. The building had a handful of tenants, but it was the family in the apartment next to mine that caught my attention. The Rosens, as they introduced themselves, were a peculiar couple. Martha was a stern woman in her late 50s, and Gerald, her husband, seemed just as distant. They were polite but reserved, often keeping to themselves. Their apartment was always dark, and I rarely saw them outside. Their presence was almost more felt than seen. Things took a strange turn one evening when I heard a series of unsettling noises coming from their apartment. It started with muffled cries, followed by a persistent scratching sound. It went on for hours, growing louder and more erratic. I considered calling the police, but hesitated, unsure if I was overreacting. The next day, I decided to confront them. Gerald answered the door with a forced smile, his eyes darting nervously. We had some issues with the plumbing. He explained vaguely. Nothing to worry about. Their explanation did little to quell my unease, but I left it at that. However, the noises didn't stop. Each night, the disturbing sounds continued, growing more frantic and desperate. My curiosity turned into obsession, and I began to notice even stranger details. The Rosens had installed heavy curtains and kept their door locked at all times, even during the day. One night, I could no longer bear it. I decided to investigate, knowing it was risky, but feeling compelled to uncover the truth. I waited until late, when the building was quiet, and then slipped out into the hallway. With a deep breath, I approached their door. It was slightly ajar. I peered inside and saw an unsettling sight. The apartment was dimly lit, and the walls were covered in strange symbols and drawings. In the center of the living room was a large, old-fashioned wooden chest, and beside it lay a series of unsettling artifacts, old photographs, tarnished trinkets, and what appeared to be a collection of animal bones. Martha and Gerald were standing in the corner, engaged in a hushed conversation. "It's getting worse," Martha said. "We can't keep them away much longer." Gerald nodded, his face etched with fear. "We need to finish the ritual before it's too late." As they spoke, I noticed a strange, ethereal glow emanating from the chest. The room grew colder, and I felt an oppressive presence, as if something unseen was watching me. I was frozen in place, unable to move, when a loud crash echoed from the chest. It burst open, and a dark, shadowy figure began to emerge, writhing and twisting. In a panic, I stumbled back and slammed the door shut. I raced down the stairs and out into the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. The next morning, the building was eerily quiet. I went back to my apartment and found a note slipped under my door. It was from the Rosens, written in a shaky hand. "We're leaving. Don't try to find us. Forget what you saw." I never saw the Rosens again. The apartment next to mine remained vacant. The strange noises ceased, and life slowly returned to normal. But every so often, when the city falls quiet at night, I can't shake the feeling that something dark and malevolent was unleashed that night. And though the Rosens are gone, the memory of that shadowy figure and the terrifying unknown lingers in the back of my mind, a chilling reminder of the dangers that might lurk just next door. Top 3 story, The Vanishing Lights. My name is Laura Thompson, and I used to live in a quaint little apartment building in Brooklyn, New York. The place was charming, though old, with a tight-knit community of neighbors who seemed as ordinary as any you'd find in a city like this. That is, until the Harringtons moved in. The Harringtons were a young couple, Ethan and Claire, who moved into the apartment across the hall from mine. They were friendly, but kept to themselves. Their apartment was always eerily dark, even during the day, and their windows remained covered with thick, dark curtains. It struck me as odd, but I didn't think much of it until the lights began to vanish. It started subtly. Every night, around midnight, the streetlights outside would flicker and go out one by one, starting from their apartment's window. I brushed it off as a coincidence or maybe a quirk of the old wiring in the building. But then the lights inside their apartment started acting up too. One evening, while coming home late from work, I saw Ethan standing by the window, staring out with an intensity that made the hair on my neck stand up. I tried to wave, but he didn't acknowledge me. That night, the entire building was plunged into darkness for several hours. When the lights came back on, I found a note pinned to my door. "Please ignore the disturbances. We're working on an important project." The note only deepened my curiosity. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to investigate. I began to monitor their apartment from my window, watching as the Harringtons would leave at odd hours, always carrying strange, unmarked packages. One night, I followed them. They walked to a nearby abandoned warehouse, carrying a large box. I watched from a safe distance as they entered through a side door. The warehouse was old and rundown, but from the small crack in the door, I could see strange lights flickering within. I waited until they left, then slipped inside. The interior was a labyrinth of old machinery and dust-covered shelves. Following the lights, I discovered a large room at the back. In the center was a massive, strange apparatus that looked like a cross between an old radio and a machine with tangled wires and glowing tubes. Ethan and Claire were working feverishly, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights. Ethan turned, and I ducked behind a stack of crates. Through a crack, I overheard them discussing their experiment. They were trying to manipulate the city's power grid to create a field of darkness, something about harnessing energy from the other side. Fear gripped me as I realized their experiment was not just about darkness. It was about summoning something beyond our world. The air around me felt heavy, and an ominous hum filled the room. I needed to get out, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something chilling. The shadows in the room were moving, stretching out and curling around the apparatus. Suddenly, the lights went out completely, plunging me into pitch blackness. I heard faint whispers and felt an icy cold touch on my skin. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back towards the door, my heart racing, and barely managed to find my way out. The next morning, I moved out of the apartment. The Harringtons were gone without a trace, and their apartment remained dark and silent, as if they had never been there. The building management claimed they had no record of the couple, and the warehouse was found empty, with no sign of the strange machine. To this day, I don't know what they were trying to summon, or what they succeeded in bringing into our world. The lights in Brooklyn are fine now, but sometimes, on the rarest of nights, I'll see shadows flickering out of the corner of my eye. And I can't help but wonder if some things are better left unexplored.